Hello, healthcare staff and hospital workers, and welcome to the third video in my series, A Hospital's Guide for Culturally Safe Healthcare. Now, in this video, I'll be addressing some very key concepts that are really the backbone of why we practice healthcare with cultural safety in mind. Racism is such an important topic to discuss because racism against Indigenous Australians is still a very prevalent issue in today's society and exists in many forms. Racism not only has a negative immediate impact on this population, but has continuing effects on First Nations individuals and often perpetuates intergenerational trauma. As the AIDA report stated in 2009, racism works strongly against all agendas which aim to close the gaps in health and other outcomes between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and other Australians. Now, in terms of the concepts that we've previously listed, let's start with the first concept, that being racial science, otherwise known as scientific racism. Now, as per the National Human Genome Institute states, scientific racism is a historical pattern of ideologies that generate pseudoscientific racist beliefs that perpetually influences racial bias and discrimination in science and research. Now, racial science is a purposeful misuse of science to perpetuate false historical perceptions regarding race and thus justifying them. Essentially, this application of science seeks to preserve the social hierarchy established on the basis of race and the supposed superiority of some groups over others. While this sounds like an outdated and archaic practice, something that we must be beyond as an advanced society, it unfortunately continues today and thus prolongs the negative effects of racism on First Nations Australians and other individuals. While individual racism is based on interpersonal beliefs and assumptions regarding someone's culture and race, structural racism, on the other hand, is on a wider scale, basically affecting all marginalised groups. Now, the influence that structural racism continues to have is quite profound, as it particularly negatively affects Indigenous Australians, which is evidenced by the Hampton and Toombs 2013 text. Basically, in assessing a patient based on their race without consulting them but assuming, this is only reinforcing racism as a risk factor itself. Now, we can see this in an example that I've previously come across in some of my research. Let's say, for example, a woman of colour enters the hospital ER. Now, the practitioner, the GP, the doctor, whoever, the hospital worker, assumes that she is Aboriginal based on the colour of her skin. She comes in complaining of pain, in need of pain medication, but because of this assumption and the historical negative connotations to it, the doctor might wrongfully think that this is because of some pre-existing drug abuse, and so will deny her of it. Now, this only causes the woman to be in pain for an extended period of time. She's administered paracetamol, but really this is nothing compared to the pain that she's experiencing, and she does need something more than over-the-counter drugs. This woman continues to be in pain until another GP is called and she's finally administered the right pain medication. Now, this woman is in suffering for an extended period of time just based on the racial assumption that she is faking it for drug abuse. This is why it is so important to consult a patient based on their admission of hospital. If simply they had taken the history of the patient, looked up her file, or even consulted her on previous existing conditions, they might have actually gotten a correct diagnosis for this woman. But instead, she sat in the hospital ER in pain for an extended amount of time, which really is false practice of care. While this doesn't seem like it happens every day, it really continues to happen in society, and this is the racism that we are trying to confront. Now, this brings us around to our final and probably the most unheard of terms in terms of terminology concept, that being anti-racism. Now, anti-racism is more about the change that is happening, essentially the actions and measures that we're taking to directly combat racism, as opposed to just talking about it and theorizing about it and acknowledging it. Acknowledging it is the first step, but not much action is usually taken after that point. This change, in reference to Parity's 2007 text, includes altering or disproving policies or implementing anti-racism education, basically anything that decreases or abolishes the practice and presence of racism in Australia and in healthcare. Now, just like the American athlete Jackie Joyner-Kersee once said, "Don't follow in any footprints, make your own prints, because you are the future of tomorrow." We are the future of tomorrow. We need to acknowledge past and present applications of institutionalized and structural racism, as well as individual racism, and ensure that our practices within our hospitals are culturally safe, promoting the health of all individuals rather than further damaging it further. I hope you've enjoyed this last video of the series, and thank you for watching.